Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Historian, a quiet corner where the past drifts in softly and forgotten worlds return as gentle stories for the night. Tonight, we'll be wandering into the strange and shadowed year 536, when the sky itself seemed to change its mind about shining, and the ripple of that silence shaped empires, faith, cities of stone, distant battlefields, and even the careful strategies of Roman power. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background. And let's slowly step into the past, softly, gently, together. You wake before sunrise, as people often do in the early 6th century. The morning air is cool but ordinary. Somewhere nearby, a rooster calls with the confidence of a creature that believes the world still runs on familiar schedules. The fields wait beyond the village path. The seasons have always followed one another with patient reliability, like bread rising in a warm oven you never question. But something is different. At first, you notice it only because the light seems slower to arrive. The sun rises. Yes, it lifts itself over the horizon exactly where it should, yet it does not shine the way it once did. The brightness is thinner, as though someone has placed a pale cloth between the earth and the sky. Shadows do not stretch across the ground the way they used to. They hesitate, they blur, they almost disappear. Across the Byzantine world, a careful historian named Procopius writes that the sun now gives its light without brightness. He does not explain what that means, because he assumes anyone reading his words will already understand the feeling. It is the sort of sentence you write only when everyone around you has begun quietly looking upward with the same uncertain expression. In distant China, court observers record strange dust drifting through the air. In Ireland, monks begin noting a failure of bread. Their words are brief, almost polite, but they carry the weight of hunger already beginning to spread across fields that should have been green. No one yet speaks of disaster. Instead, people speak of weather. You walk into the barley field expecting the usual brightness of early summer. The soil still smells right. The wind still moves through the stalks, but the color is wrong. The green seems duller, as though the earth itself is unsure whether to continue growing. Nearby, a farmer lifts his hand toward the sky and squints. He does not complain. Farmers rarely complain to the sky. Instead, he studies the light the way a sailor studies the tide, quietly wondering whether it has begun to change its habits. He presses one barley head between his fingers and waits a moment longer than usual before moving on. Weeks pass, and the dimness does not leave. A strange, dry haze settles across the horizon. It does not behave like fog. It does not smell like smoke. It does not move with the wind. It simply remains, like a curtain that no one remembers hanging. In some places, travelers say they can see stars during the day. Not clearly, not brightly, but enough to notice, enough to stop speaking mid-sentence and look upward again. Birds begin flying in uncertain directions. Migrating flocks circle and return, as if the sky itself has misplaced its map. Rivers run a little slower. The air holds a quiet stillness that does not belong to any familiar season. You begin to notice that time feels different. Morning and afternoon no longer stand as far apart from each other as they once did. Noon arrives without confidence. Evening comes without color. It becomes harder to tell when one part of the day has ended and another has begun. In the village, people continue their routines because there is nothing else to do. Bread must still be baked. Animals must still be fed. Children must still be told stories before sleep. Yet conversations linger longer than usual at doorways, and more people pause before speaking, as though waiting for someone else to explain what the sky is doing. A monk in a nearby settlement adjusts the calendar marks he has been copying all winter. Feast days remain in the same order, but the light that should accompany them does not behave correctly. He checks the dates again, then the sky again, then the dates once more. He does not erase anything. He simply writes more slowly. Across the northern lands, trees begin recording the same quiet confusion in their rings. Growth becomes thinner, tighter, narrower than before. No one sees this yet, of course. The trees keep their memory hidden inside their trunks, waiting centuries for someone patient enough to read it. But already they are writing a message about a year when warmth became uncertain. Back in the fields, the barley farmer walks the edge of his land again at dusk. The sun is still there, low and pale, like a coin rubbed smooth by too many hands. He watches it for a moment longer than yesterday. He does not say anything. He simply turns toward home earlier than usual because there is less light to finish the work. And somewhere beyond the horizon, far above the clouds where no one alive can yet look, fine dust from distant mountains has begun drifting through the high air, quietly changing the way sunlight reaches the earth. No one knows that yet. For now, all anyone knows is that the sun has started shining differently, and that the fields are beginning to answer in silence. You begin to notice that the dimness is not leaving. At first, everyone expects the sky to correct itself. Weather has moods, winters linger, summers arrive late, rivers flood and then return to their banks. The world has always shifted in small ways without asking permission. But this feels different. The pale curtain across the sky does not lift with the wind. It does not dissolve with rain. It does not thin as the weeks pass. Instead, it settles more deeply into daily life, as though the sunlight itself has grown tired and decided to rest halfway between heaven and earth. Across distant lands, people begin describing the same strange light. In cities beside the Mediterranean, daylight arrives without warmth. In northern forests, shadows soften until they almost disappear. In eastern kingdoms, observers write that dust falls from the sky in faint yellow veils that do not behave like ordinary storms. No one knows that far above the clouds, something enormous has already happened. High in the upper air, where no birds travel and no mountains reach, a fine drifting powder has begun circling the world. It comes from violent openings in the earth, far beyond the horizon. Great mountains of fire have released their breath into the sky, sending invisible layers of ash so high that they move slowly around the planet like a thin second atmosphere. The people living beneath that sky cannot see the source. They only feel the change. In later centuries, scholars will study deep layers of ancient ice, taken from the frozen north and from the far southern continent of snow. Inside those long cylinders of ice, they will find faint gray traces from the year 536. The layers will show that the sky carried unusual dust across nearly the whole world at once, a quiet record preserved in frozen silence for more than 1,000 years. For now, though, you simply wake each morning and notice that the light still feels incomplete. In the monastery nearby, the monk who keeps the calendar has begun checking his records more often than usual. He listens carefully for the bells that mark the hours of prayer, then steps outside to compare their timing with the sky. The bells are correct. The sky is not. He walks along the edge of the orchard and studies the leaves. They should be broader by now. They should be darker. Instead, they remain small and hesitant, like thoughts that never quite become sentences. He returns indoors and adjusts nothing. He only writes a small note in the margin beside the date, a quiet acknowledgement that the seasons are no longer behaving as expected. Far to the north, forests are already responding in ways no one living there can yet understand. Trees begin growing more slowly. Their rings tighten, becoming thin and narrow, storing a memory of cold summers that future readers will one day uncover with careful hands and patient tools. These forests are not dying. They are simply enduring. Across the middle lands of Europe, farmers continue planting as they always have. Seeds still go into the soil. Animals still move through pastures. Yet the warmth that usually lifts the young shoots upward now arrives too weakly to help them grow with confidence. Some mornings feel like early spring even when the calendar insists it should be summer. In parts of northern Asia, observers report frost arriving when it should not exist at all. Crops that had begun their slow rise toward maturity pause, as if waiting for permission to continue. In other regions, fine dust drifts across fields and settles on rooftops in thin, pale layers that cannot be brushed away easily. The sky has become something unfamiliar. What makes this change especially unsettling is that it does not arrive all at once. It stretches itself gently across months, then across years, until people begin to wonder whether this is simply how the world works now. And then, just as communities begin adjusting to the dimmer light, another disturbance reaches the sky. Several years after the first fading of the sun, the upper air fills again with drifting ash. No one sees it rise. No one hears it fall. But once more, the sunlight weakens, and the warmth of summer hesitates. Later still, a third distant eruption sends another quiet veil across the horizon. These events unfold across more than a decade, not as a single moment of catastrophe, but as a slow sequence of interruptions. Each one makes recovery harder. Each one stretches uncertainty further into the future. By now, people have begun noticing that the seasons themselves feel unreliable. Planting days no longer match memory. Harvest weeks arrive without fullness. Travelers describe valleys where the air feels cooler than it should, and hillsides where vineyards struggle to ripen their fruit. Even rivers seem quieter. Some flow more slowly. Others carry less water than expected. In certain regions, rains arrive late or not at all, leaving fields waiting beneath a sky that still refuses to brighten. You begin to understand that this is no ordinary weather. The barley farmer you saw earlier walks the edge of his field again, this time with shorter steps. He kneels beside a patch of earth where seedlings should already be strong enough to sway in the wind. Instead, they remain thin and uncertain, their leaves pale at the edges. He presses the soil between his fingers and listens to the silence of the afternoon. He does not yet know the word for what is happening. No one does. But he understands something simple and important. If the sun continues like this, the harvest will not come as expected. And if the harvest does not come, the village will begin to change in ways no calendar can measure. As the dim light continues through the growing season, the first real signs of trouble do not arrive with noise. They arrive with hesitation. Seeds still go into the soil, Farmers still walk the same paths between their fields. Children still chase one another along the edges of irrigation ditches. Yet something beneath all this movement begins to slow, like a conversation that suddenly loses its rhythm. Barley rises only halfway. Wheat sends up shoots that remain thinner than expected. Grapevines climb their wooden frames but hesitate before forming fruit. At first, no one speaks openly about failure. A farmer may simply say, "The soil feels tired this year." Another may mention that the mornings are colder than he remembers from previous summers. These are ordinary complaints, the sort that pass quietly between neighbors and disappear with the wind. But the wind itself now feels uncertain. Rain arrives late in some regions and not at all in others. Rivers that usually carry the strong voice of mountain snow begin moving more slowly, as though the water itself is thinking carefully before continuing downhill. In distant lands to the south and east, seasonal rains that farmers depend on begin arriving at unusual times. In parts of India, the familiar rhythm of monsoon weather shifts just enough to trouble planting schedules that had been trusted for generations. The change is not dramatic enough to be named at once, but it is persistent enough to be remembered. Across the highlands of East Africa, royal inscriptions that once recorded confident victories and steady rule begin appearing less frequently. No one writes that crops are failing. No one needs to. Silence begins carrying the message instead. Farther north, in the territories of the northern Wei court in China, frost appears where frost should not exist. Summer fields receive a touch of winter. Rice plants bend under unexpected cold. Court officials record these events carefully, not because they understand them, but because they recognize that the heavens are behaving in unfamiliar ways. Offerings are made, rituals are performed, the sky does not answer. In Western lands, monks quietly continue writing about the failure of bread. It is a gentle phrase for something that is not gentle at all. Bread is not only food. It is memory, routine, and reassurance shaped into something warm enough to hold in your hands. When bread fails, certainty fails with it. Back in your village, the animals begin to notice the change even before the people do. Chickens lay fewer eggs. Cows grow thinner at the edges of their ribs. Sheep wander farther than usual while grazing, as if searching for grass that has already withdrawn into the soil. A farmer who has watched these animals for many seasons does not need numbers or records to understand what is happening. He reads their silence the way he reads the sky. One morning he pauses beside the small wooden fence that marks the edge of his pasture and counts his animals again. He has counted them many times before. Today he counts them more slowly. Inside his home, grain is measured with equal care. A family sits together beside a storage basket that once felt comfortably full. Now the basket holds enough for a few weeks, perhaps a little longer if meals become smaller and conversations become quieter. They do not speak about hunger. Instead, they begin making careful choices. The evening loaf becomes thinner. Breakfast becomes shorter. A handful of grain is set aside rather than ground into flour, not because anyone is certain what tomorrow will bring, but because uncertainty itself has begun to feel heavier than usual. Across larger towns and cities, these same choices appear in different forms. Grain markets become tense places. Prices rise slowly at first, then more quickly, as merchants realize that harvest wagons are arriving lighter than expected. No one yet calls this a crisis. They simply notice that bread costs more. In Constantinople, where the great city depends on grain shipped across the sea from Egypt, the change feels sharper. Ships still arrive, but their cargo seems smaller. Bakers begin adjusting their portions carefully. Citizens begin watching the markets with more attention than usual. The empire continues its work as always. Laws are copied, roads are repaired, churches are built. Yet beneath these ordinary activities runs a quieter current of concern that no proclamation can entirely remove. Across the countryside, the sky remains pale. Seasons continue to pass, but they no longer carry the same confidence. Spring arrives late. Summer arrives weekly. Autumn arrives too soon. The calendar still turns its pages, but the land no longer follows along. Some people begin gathering food that would normally be ignored. Roots are dug earlier in the year. Bark from certain trees is boiled and softened into thin meals that fill the stomach without truly feeding it. These choices are made quietly. No one announces them. They simply become part of daily life. In one household, near the edge of the village, a mother sits beside the small grain basket again at dusk. She runs her fingers slowly through what remains, measuring the weight without needing a scale. Outside, the evening light fades earlier than she expects. Her children do not ask questions. They have already learned to eat more slowly. She closes the lid of the basket gently and sets it back in its corner, not because it is full, but because she wants it to look as though it still belongs there. Beyond the village fields, across rivers that flow more quietly than before, and across kingdoms that are beginning to notice similar changes, the pattern continues spreading. The dim sky has already altered the harvest. And the harvest, in turn, is beginning to alter the shape of ordinary life. Soon, in the colder northern lands where forests stretch farther than farms, the silence left behind by this failing warmth will become even easier to see. Far to the north, where forests stretch longer than roads and winter always arrives with quiet authority, the dimming of the sun leaves a different kind of trace. Here, people are used to difficult seasons. They expect long nights. They expect frozen rivers. They expect winds that travel across open land without asking permission. Hardship is not unusual in these northern places. But this is something else. Summers grow shorter in a way that feels unfamiliar even to those who measure time by snowmelt and birdsong. Warm days arrive late and leave early. Grass rises slowly and then stops as though it has forgotten what it was meant to do next. The forests notice first. Trees that usually widen their trunks each year begin growing thinner rings instead. They still stand. They still live, yet their quiet inner record shows that warmth has become uncertain. Decades later, when these trees are cut and studied carefully, their narrow rings will reveal a story about cold summers and shortened seasons that lasted longer than anyone expected. For now, though, the trees simply stand in silence. Across Scandinavia, farms begin changing shape in subtle ways. Fields that once supported families through several winters now produce less grain. Pastures feed fewer animals. Storage buildings that once held reserves for difficult years begin emptying earlier than planned. At first, people adjust as they always have. They gather more from the forests. They fish longer along the coastlines. They move animals farther in search of grass. But even these strategies begin to fail. Archaeologists, many centuries later, will notice something unusual when they examine the remains of these settlements. In some regions, farmsteads seem to vanish from the record. Burial grounds grow quieter. Villages that once showed steady activity appear to pause, as though their inhabitants stepped away and did not return. It is not a dramatic disappearance. It is a gradual thinning. One farm is abandoned, then another, then a third stands empty long enough for the forest to begin reclaiming the path that once led to its door. No one writes detailed explanations of these changes. Northern communities leave fewer written records than the great cities of the South. Instead, they leave something quieter behind: absence. Later generations will inherit stories of long winters, stubborn endurance, and gods who do not always promise comfort. Some scholars will wonder whether these memories grew partly from this period, when seasons themselves seemed uncertain and survival required patience rather than certainty. In these northern lands, memory often travels through stories rather than ink. Near the edge of one forest clearing, a shepherd walks slowly along the boundary of his pasture. He knows each animal by its shape and movement. He has watched them grow through many seasons. This year he pauses more often. The grass is shorter. The ground feels colder beneath his boots, even in what should be the warmest part of the year. He counts his animals once, as he always does. Then he counts them again, more carefully. One is missing. He tells himself it has wandered beyond the hill. The next morning he counts again. Another is gone. He does not speak about this immediately. Shepherds understand that losses sometimes come quietly. Yet after several days, he begins walking farther along the forest edge, searching for tracks where animals might have strayed in search of better grazing. The forest does not answer him. Along the coasts, fishing villages continue working as they always have. But even the sea feels different. Storms arrive at unfamiliar times. Ice lingers longer along sheltered inlets. Boats leave later in the season and return sooner than expected. No single change explains what is happening. It is the accumulation that matters. Across these northern regions, families begin making difficult choices. Some remain where they are, trusting that the seasons will eventually return to their familiar patterns. Others move toward more reliable farmland farther south or closer to the sea. When they leave, they do not announce their departure. They simply carry what they can and follow the paths that seem most promising. Over time, entire clusters of farms fall quiet. Paths disappear beneath grass. Fences collapse slowly. Roof beams sink inward as winters pass without repair. Forest animals move closer to the abandoned fields, stepping carefully at first, then with confidence as seasons pass. The land does not forget the people who lived there, but it does not wait for them either. Much later, when seafaring communities from these same northern regions begin traveling across wide oceans and appearing along distant coasts, they will carry with them a reputation for endurance that surprises those who meet them. They will seem unusually prepared for uncertainty, unusually patient in the face of cold winds and long journeys. Perhaps this strength comes from many sources. Yet somewhere in their distant memory lies a time when the sun itself seemed unreliable, and survival depended on learning how to continue without expecting comfort. Back in the clearing beside the forest, the shepherd returns once more to the edge of his pasture as evening settles across the hills. The light fades earlier than it should. He counts the remaining animals again, slower than before. This time he does not expect the missing ones to return. He turns toward home while there is still enough light to see the path, already understanding that the seasons ahead may require more than patience alone. Far to the south, in cities where marble buildings still shine beside busy harbors, rulers and officials are beginning to notice that the northern silence is only one part of a much larger change. Far from the quiet northern forests, where abandoned paths are slowly fading into grass, another kind of silence is beginning to gather in a very different place. Constantinople does not grow quiet easily. It is a city of ships and markets, of stone domes rising above crowded streets, of voices carried across the water between docks and towers. From sunrise until late evening, the harbor usually moves with the steady confidence of a place that expects the world to arrive at its gates. And yet even here, under walls that have stood for generations, people begin to notice that something is changing. The ships still come, but their cargo feels lighter. For centuries, this city has depended on grain carried across the sea from Egypt. The harvests along the Nile have long fed the capital of the Eastern Empire, filling storehouses that keep bread ovens warm and markets stable even when local fields cannot provide enough. Now those shipments begin arriving differently. No one sees empty ships at first. That would be too obvious. Instead, merchants notice that sacks are fewer. Bakers notice that flour must be measured more carefully. Buyers notice that prices shift slightly from one week to the next. Small changes at first, then larger ones. In the harbor district, a dock worker lifts one of the arriving grain sacks onto his shoulder and pauses longer than usual before carrying it inland. He has unloaded these shipments for many seasons. His body knows their weight, the way a musician knows the sound of a familiar instrument. This sack feels lighter. He does not complain. Dock workers rarely complain about the sea. Instead, he adjusts his grip and continues walking along the wooden planks toward the warehouse doors, already wondering how many more shipments will feel the same. Inside the markets, bakers begin shaping loaves with careful hands. Bread remains available, but it no longer feels ordinary. Customers watch the ovens more closely than before. Conversations pause when someone mentions the price of flour. The city continues its routine. Courts remain open. Officials continue copying documents. Messengers cross the streets, carrying orders from one district to another. Yet beneath this movement runs a quieter current of attention, as though the entire population is listening for something it cannot yet hear clearly. Above the city, the great dome of Hagia Sophia rises into the pale light. Construction has only recently been completed after enormous effort, and its vast interior still carries the echo of new stone. Emperor Justinian himself once stood beneath that dome and declared that he had surpassed the greatest temples of earlier ages. The building seems to float above the city like a promise that order and faith remain secure. Now the same dome catches a sunlight that feels thinner than before. Citizens still gather beneath it. Candles still burn. Incense still rises slowly toward the ceiling. But even inside that magnificent space, the light filtering through the windows appears softer, as though the sky itself has become cautious. Justinian continues his work. He has spent years reorganizing the laws of the empire into a single great collection so they can be read and followed more easily across distant provinces. He has supported building projects meant to strengthen both the appearance and the reality of imperial stability. He has sent armies westward to reclaim lands that once belonged to Rome generations earlier. These are not the actions of a ruler who expects the world to grow uncertain. Yet uncertainty arrives anyway. Reports begin reaching the capital from distant regions. Harvests have weakened. Winters have lasted longer than expected. Travelers describe strange skies and unfamiliar cold. None of these reports alone would alarm an emperor. Together, they begin forming a pattern that cannot easily be ignored. Inside churches across the city, clergy speak more often about patience and endurance. Some interpret the dim sky as a sign that the world is being reminded of its fragility. Others encourage prayer not because they know what has happened, but because prayer is the most reliable response available. Citizens listen carefully. Some choose fasting, some give alms, some simply continue their routines while glancing upward more often than before. In narrow streets behind the main markets, families begin storing what extra food they can manage. No one announces these decisions publicly. They are made quietly, at kitchen tables, and beside storage jars, with the same careful movements used by families in distant villages far beyond the city walls. Across the empire, the same pattern is repeating. Egyptian farmers along the Nile watch their fields closely. Merchants crossing Anatolia notice cooler winds lingering later into the season. Provincial governors write letters that sound calm but carry subtle concern between their lines. Still, the empire continues moving forward. Ships sail. Laws are copied. Roads remain busy. Yet something unseen is traveling along those same roads and sea routes, moving slowly from port to port, city to city, following the familiar paths of trade that connect the empire together. No one in Constantinople has noticed it yet. At the harbor, the dock worker finishes stacking the last of the grain sacks inside the warehouse. He wipes his hands against his tunic and looks back toward the ships, rocking gently beside the quay. The afternoon light settles across the water in a pale reflection that feels quieter than he remembers from earlier years. He does not know why the shipments feel smaller. He does not know what is traveling along the same sea routes as the grain. But before long, the city that depends so carefully on these ships will discover that something else has already begun its journey toward the harbor gates. The ships continue arriving in Constantinople as they always have. They bring grain, cloth, oil, timber, and news from distant provinces. Their sails still fill with wind along familiar sea routes. Their crews still step ashore with the steady confidence of people who expect the harbor to welcome them as it always has. Yet this time, something else travels with them. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with banners or warning bells. Instead, it moves quietly along the same paths that have always connected the empire together, passing from port to port, warehouse to warehouse, household to household, following the invisible threads of trade that hold cities close to one another, even across great distances of sea. At first, only a few people fall ill. Their symptoms seem ordinary enough. Fever comes quickly. Strength fades unexpectedly. Families remain beside their beds, expecting recovery after a few difficult days. Illness is never unusual in a crowded city. Constantinople has seen sickness before and recovered from it many times. But this illness does not behave like the others. It spreads faster than memory expects. Within weeks, more households begin closing their doors. Streets that once carried the steady rhythm of carts and footsteps grow quieter in the afternoon. Bakers still open their ovens. Merchants still arrange their goods, yet fewer customers arrive, and conversations grow shorter. Soon, people begin noticing swelling in the body that arrives suddenly and leaves just as suddenly, but not in the way anyone hopes. Fever rises quickly. Breath becomes uncertain. Strength disappears without warning. The illness moves through the city like a shadow that cannot be followed. Later generations will learn that the disease traveled with fleas carried by rats that lived among cargo ships and grain stores. But the people living through these days do not see fleas. They do not study disease. They only see neighbors disappearing from familiar doorways. Within a short time, even officials inside the imperial administration begin falling ill. Letters remain unfinished. Orders are delayed. Couriers arrive at offices where fewer voices answer them. The emperor himself becomes sick for a time. Though he survives, many others do not. Across Constantinople, burial grounds fill more quickly than anyone expected. Funeral prayers that once unfolded slowly, with careful attention to each life remembered, must now be shortened simply because there are too many names to speak. Church bells ring more often. Then they begin ringing so frequently that people stop counting. In narrow streets behind the great avenues, families remain indoors longer than usual. Neighbors who once greeted each other each morning now watch one another from a distance, unsure whether conversation itself might carry danger. Markets remain open, but they feel different. Fewer voices rise above the stalls. Fewer arguments unfold over the price of bread. The ordinary noise of city life fades into something softer and more cautious. Beyond the city walls, similar stories begin traveling along the roads that connect the provinces of the empire. Towns report sudden losses. Villages struggle to keep fields planted with fewer hands available to work them. Soldiers preparing for distant campaigns find their numbers shrinking before they even leave their training grounds. The empire continues to function, but it functions more slowly. Some historians, many centuries later, will estimate that between 25 million and 50 million people across the wider region may have died during these years of illness. No one living through the event counts so precisely. They only notice that familiar faces are missing from gatherings that once felt full. In a small village, not far from the outer roads leading toward the capital, a priest stands beside a narrow burial ground at the edge of a field. He has spoken the same prayers here for many seasons. He knows their rhythm well enough that he could recite them even in darkness. Recently, he has begun shortening them, not because the words have lost their meaning, but because the number of burials has grown too large to allow the full ceremony each time. He pauses beside each grave for a moment longer than required, quietly finishing the rest of the prayer in silence rather than aloud. He hopes the silence carries just as far. Across the countryside, families adjust to the absence of those who once shared their work. Fields that had already struggled under uncertain sunlight now face another challenge. There are fewer hands to plant, fewer hands to harvest, fewer hands to repair tools and care for animals. Yet life continues. Children still wake each morning. Fires are still lit. Bread is still baked when grain can be found. The world does not end. It simply grows quieter in ways that people will remember long after the sky begins to brighten again. In later centuries, writers reflecting on these years will notice something else as well. Stories about the end of the world begin appearing more often. Poems grow darker in tone. Sermons speak more frequently about patience and endurance rather than certainty and reward. When people have lived through dim sunlight, failing harvests, and spreading illness within a single lifetime, the future begins to feel different. Even after the sky slowly clears and the warmth of summer begins returning to familiar places, memory keeps its hold. Back in Constantinople, the harbor remains open. Ships still arrive. But the dock worker who once noticed the lighter grain sacks now walks along the quay with fewer companions beside him. The afternoon light still settles across the water, pale but steady, as though the sun is slowly remembering how to shine again. For a moment, he pauses beside the edge of the harbor and watches the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. He cannot know that in centuries to come, people will look back on these years as the beginning of a colder and more uncertain age. He only knows that the city has endured something difficult, and that beyond its walls, across distant lands where forests once fell silent and fields once hesitated to grow, people are beginning to search for meaning in stone, light, and faith that rises upward instead of fading away. Several centuries pass. The dim skies of the 6th century slowly withdraw into memory. The harvests return. Villages rebuild. Roads grow busy again. Children are born who never saw the pale sun that once confused their grandparents. Yet the memory of uncertainty does not disappear entirely. It settles quietly into stories, prayers, and habits that shape how communities understand the world around them. By the 12th century, something new is beginning to rise across Europe. Cities are growing. Markets expand along riverbanks. Merchants travel more confidently between regions. Workshops cluster beside narrow streets where tools ring against wood and metal from early morning until dusk. The countryside still matters deeply, but towns now carry a stronger voice than they once did. And in the center of many of these towns, people begin building upward. Not slowly in the way of ordinary houses, not cautiously like barns or storage halls, but boldly, in stone. You walk through one of these growing towns at dawn and hear the sound before you see the structure itself. Wooden wheels creak across damp streets as oxen pull heavy carts loaded with pale limestone. The animals move patiently, their breath visible in the cool air as they lean into their harnesses. Each cart carries blocks that will soon become part of something larger than any single household could imagine building alone. At the edge of the town square, scaffolding rises around a structure that is still only partly visible. Timber poles stretch upward like a temporary forest, surrounding walls that are already taller than most nearby roofs. Workers climb narrow ladders carrying tools worn smooth by many hands. Stone chips fall gently to the ground below, adding a fine layer of pale dust to the streets. This is not a small project. It is a cathedral. Towns across France, England, the German lands, and beyond begin building these vast churches almost as if they are answering one another across distance. No messenger coordinates their efforts. No ruler commands them all at once. Yet the pattern spreads steadily from region to region. Each town wishes to build higher. Each town wishes to build brighter. Each town wishes to build something that will last longer than memory itself. Part of this desire comes from faith. A cathedral is a place where prayers gather and rise together, but part of it also comes from something quieter and more human. A great building at the center of a town tells travelers that the community is strong, confident, and meant to endure. Stone becomes a language that everyone can read. Along the construction site, an apprentice mason kneels beside a block of limestone newly delivered from a nearby quarry. He has spent months watching older workers shape stones with careful patience. Today, for the first time, he is allowed to prepare a block himself. He runs his hand across the surface, feeling the faint roughness left by the quarry tools. Then he lifts his hammer and begins tapping gently along the edges, not striking hard enough to crack the stone, only firm enough to guide it into shape. The sound travels outward in small, steady echoes. He works slowly. Each tap matters. Nearby, master builders study wooden plans that describe how the walls will rise. These builders are not only craftsmen, they are planners, teachers, and problem solvers who understand how weight moves through stone the way water moves through a river channel. They know that if one piece is placed incorrectly, the entire structure may lean in ways no one can repair later. So they teach carefully. And the apprentices listen. The construction will not finish quickly. Everyone involved understands this from the beginning. Some cathedrals take decades to complete. Others continue rising for generations. A worker who places a stone today may never live to see the tower finished above it. Yet the work continues anyway. Families bring food to the workers. Merchants donate materials. Guilds organize schedules so that carpenters, stonecutters, rope makers, and metalworkers all contribute at the right moment. The building belongs to everyone. Even the bells that will one day hang in the tower already shape the imagination of the town. People speak about how their sound will carry across fields and rooftops, marking hours of prayer and market time alike. The cathedral is not only a church, it is a promise. As the walls rise higher, travelers approaching from distant roads begin recognizing the town long before they reach its gates. The unfinished tower becomes a landmark visible across open countryside, a sign that something important is happening there. Children grow up watching the structure change year by year. At first, they see only scaffolding. Later, they see arches forming above the entrances. Eventually, they begin noticing windows opening high above the streets where no windows existed before. The building becomes part of their sense of time itself. Centuries earlier, people had watched the sky grow dim without understanding why. Now their descendants watch stone rise toward that same sky with quiet determination, as though answering a question that had once been asked but never spoken aloud. Back at the edge of the construction yard, the apprentice mason finishes shaping the surface of his first stone block. He brushes away the dust with the side of his hand and steps back to look at the smooth edge he has created. It is only one block among thousands. Yet he knows exactly where it will go. He lifts it carefully with the help of another worker and carries it toward the rising wall, already understanding that the building will continue growing long after his own tools have been set aside. Above him, the unfinished tower reaches upward into a pale but steady afternoon sky that feels brighter than the one remembered in distant stories of older centuries. And as the walls continue rising, something else begins to change as well. Stone itself is learning how to reach higher than anyone once believed possible. As the cathedral walls rise higher year by year, something unexpected begins to happen inside them. The spaces grow taller than anyone had seen before. Earlier churches had always been strong and beautiful, but they tended to feel grounded and solid, with thick walls and low ceilings that held the weight of the roof close to the earth. These buildings protected those inside them. They surrounded worshippers with stone that felt dependable and steady. Now, however, builders begin experimenting with a different idea. Instead of keeping weight pressed downward through heavy walls, they begin guiding it gently along curved paths, allowing the structure itself to share its burden more gracefully. The stone does not become weaker. It becomes more cooperative. One of the first changes people notice appears in the shape of the arches. Older buildings often used rounded arches that followed a simple curve from one side to the other. They were reliable and strong, but they spread weight outward in ways that limited how high walls could safely rise. The new arches look different. They rise in a gentle point at the top, like two lines meeting in quiet agreement above the doorway. This shape allows the weight of the roof to travel more directly downward rather than pushing strongly against the sides. With that small adjustment, builders discover that walls can stand taller without needing to grow thicker. To someone walking beneath these arches for the first time, the difference feels subtle at first. Then it begins to feel remarkable. The ceiling seems farther away. The air feels lighter. The space above your head no longer presses downward in the same familiar way. Stone has learned a new posture. Inside the cathedral yard, apprentices gather around a master mason who kneels beside a wooden guide frame shaped in the form of one of these pointed arches. He runs his hand along its curve slowly, showing how each stone block must lean slightly toward the center so that the arch supports itself once the wooden frame is removed. He does not speak loudly. He does not need to. The shape explains itself. Nearby, another innovation begins appearing overhead. Instead of covering the ceiling with a single heavy surface of stone, builders begin creating a network of narrow supporting lines that cross the ceiling like the branches of a quiet tree. These lines carry the weight along planned paths, guiding it towards strong points in the walls below. Between those supporting lines, lighter stone panels fill the spaces. This arrangement allows ceilings to rise higher than before without becoming dangerously heavy. The structure begins to feel less like a solid roof and more like a carefully balanced canopy. Workers walking beneath it notice the change immediately. Voices echo differently. Footsteps sound softer. Light travels farther across the floor. Outside the cathedral, another transformation appears. Along the outer walls, curved stone supports begin reaching outward from the building, like gentle arms extending into the open air. At first glance, they look decorative, almost like ornaments placed along the sides of the structure. In truth, they carry an important task. These supports receive the sideways pressure from the high walls and guide it safely down into the ground beyond the main structure. By doing this work outside the building rather than inside it, they allow the interior walls to grow taller and thinner than before. People walking through the streets nearby begin recognizing these outward-reaching supports even before they understand their purpose. They cast long shadows across the construction yard in the afternoon light, forming patterns that move slowly as the sun travels across the sky. Children sometimes pause to watch those shadows stretch across the ground. To them, the building appears almost alive. Inside the cathedral, the master mason lifts a small stone piece, shaped to fit between two larger blocks. He places it carefully into position at the center of a rising arch and steps back so the apprentices can see how the shape locks the structure together. This stone, he explains quietly, does not hold the arch by itself. It reminds the other stones how to hold one another. The apprentices nod, though they may not fully understand yet. Understanding comes slowly in work like this. As the structure rises higher, townspeople begin noticing something else as well. The walls are no longer filled entirely with stone. Openings appear where windows will soon be placed, and these openings grow larger with each passing season of construction. Light begins entering the building more freely. At first, it falls in simple pale lines across the floor. Later, it will arrive in colors that shift gently through the hours of the day. But even now, before the glass is complete, people sense that the building is preparing to welcome something new. The cathedral is no longer only a shelter. It is becoming a place where light itself is invited to stay. The apprentice who shaped his first stone block only days earlier now stands beneath one of the rising arches and looks upward. He can see the wooden frames that still hold the stones in place while the structure settles into its balance. He knows that soon those frames will be removed, leaving the arch standing on its own. For a moment, he imagines what the space will feel like when the scaffolding is gone and the ceiling rises freely above him. It will feel taller than any room he has ever entered. It will feel quieter. It will feel closer to the sky. As the afternoon fades and workers begin setting aside their tools for the evening, the long outer supports cast extended shadows across the yard once again. Their curved shapes stretch along the ground like patient wings, resting beside the walls they help protect. Soon, those walls will hold something even more remarkable than height. They will begin to hold stories written in light. Once the cathedral walls grow tall enough to hold large openings, the builders begin preparing for something that will change the feeling of the interior completely. They begin preparing for windows made not only of glass, but of color. Earlier churches had windows as well, though they were often small and simple. Thick stone walls left little room for wide openings, and clear glass was difficult to produce in large pieces. Light entered those buildings carefully, almost cautiously, as if it were visiting rather than settling in. Now the walls have grown lighter and taller, and the windows grow with them. At first, townspeople see only empty spaces where glass will soon be placed. Sunlight moves through those openings freely, stretching across unfinished floors and climbing slowly along pillars that still smell faintly of fresh-cut stone. But soon, something new appears. Panels of colored glass begin arriving at the construction yard, wrapped carefully in cloth and straw. Some pieces glow deep blue, others shine red like warm embers. Still others carry soft greens and gentle gold tones that change as the sun moves across the sky. These colors are not chosen by accident. They are part of a larger idea. Many people living in these towns cannot read long-written texts. Books are rare and precious, and learning to read requires time that most families must spend working instead. Yet everyone understands images, so the windows become stories. Scenes from familiar sacred traditions appear piece by piece in glass. Figures walk across narrow strips of light above the floor. Kings kneel, travelers cross rivers, shepherds watch distant stars. Mothers hold children wrapped in cloth. Each image shines differently depending on the hour of the day, as though the stories themselves are moving quietly through time. Inside the cathedral, these windows do more than decorate the walls. They teach, they remind, they guide. Centuries earlier, when the sky itself seemed uncertain and harvests failed beneath dim sunlight, people learned to carry memory through spoken stories. Now those stories rise again, not in words, but in color. In the Abbey of Saint Denis near Paris, an abbot named Suger begins speaking about light in a new way. He believes that light inside a sacred building can help people feel closer to what they cannot see directly. When sunlight passes through colored glass, he explains, it becomes gentler and more beautiful, like a message translated into a language the heart understands more easily than the mind. Builders and artists listen carefully. They begin arranging windows so that light does not enter randomly, but intentionally. Many cathedrals face toward the east, where the sun rises each morning. This direction carries quiet meaning. Dawn has long been associated with renewal, with beginnings, with a steady promise that darkness does not last forever. When morning light passes through the eastern windows, the interior of the cathedral fills slowly with color that changes as the day continues. People entering at sunrise see one set of colors. Those arriving at midday see another. Evening visitors find the floor painted with softer tones that stretch gently toward the western doors. The building itself becomes a calendar of light. In a small workshop beside the cathedral yard, a glass painter sits at a wooden table covered with fragments of colored glass. He lifts one piece after another toward the window beside him, watching how each color responds to the sunlight before deciding where it should be placed. Blue glass is especially precious. It requires careful preparation and rare materials gathered from distant regions. When the painter holds one deep blue fragment between his fingers, the light passing through it turns his hands into shadows edged with color. He studies the fragment quietly before setting it into position beside a smaller piece of red glass that will form part of a figure's robe. Each piece must fit exactly. Too much pressure will break it. Too little support will loosen it over time. So he works slowly, pressing the glass into narrow strips of soft metal that hold the pieces together like threads holding fabric in place. Outside the workshop, townspeople pass through the square without fully seeing what is being created inside. Yet once the windows are lifted into place high above the cathedral floor, everyone will see the result. Children will point upward. Travelers will pause at the doorway. Even those who have visited many churches before will notice the difference. Because the light inside this building will not feel like ordinary daylight anymore. It will feel shaped. It will feel intentional. It will feel as though the building itself is speaking without words. As more windows are completed, the interior begins changing hour by hour. Morning brings cool blues across the eastern floor. Midday fills the center of the nave with warmer tones. Evening gathers quiet gold light near the western entrance where people prepare to leave for home. The cathedral becomes not only a place people enter, it becomes a place they watch. They return at different times of day just to see how the light has changed. They begin to understand the building as something alive in its own way, responding to the movement of the sun as faithfully as fields once responded to the passing of seasons. The glass painter steps outside his workshop late in the afternoon and looks up at one of the newly installed windows shining above the square. The colors shift slowly as the sun lowers toward the horizon. He knows that many people will never know his name, but they will know the light. And as that colored light spreads quietly across the stone floor inside the cathedral, the building begins to say something very simple and very powerful to everyone who enters. Stone can rise, light can teach, and a city can speak through both at once. As the cathedral windows begin filling with color and the walls rise steadily toward the sky, something else begins to change within the town itself. The building is no longer only a construction project. It becomes the center of daily life. Long before the final tower is finished, people begin organizing their time around the cathedral's presence. The square beside its walls grows busier each season. Merchants bring goods to sell near the entrance where travelers gather. Pilgrims arrive from distant villages, drawn by stories of sacred spaces filled with colored light. Bakers carry warm loaves across the square in the early morning while the air still holds the quiet coolness of night. The cathedral becomes a meeting place even before it becomes a completed church. In many towns, Its bells are the first signals people hear each day. At sunrise, a bell rings to call the city gently into motion. Workers lift tools. Shopkeepers open shutters. Farmers guiding carts through the gates adjust their pace to match the sound traveling across the rooftops. Later in the morning, another bell marks the hour when markets are busiest. Conversations grow louder. Coins change hands. Children weave between baskets of vegetables and bundles of cloth. At midday, the bell rings again, slower now, inviting people to pause. Some step inside the cathedral to rest in the colored light. Others simply stand still in the square for a moment, listening. The bell does not command them. It reminds them. Near the base of the unfinished tower, a narrow staircase curves upward inside the stone. A bell ringer climbs these steps each morning, carrying a small lantern when the sky is still gray. He moves carefully along the worn edges of the stairs, guided as much by memory as by sight. Sometimes his daughter follows him part of the way. She is too young to climb all the steps alone, but she has already learned to recognize the sound each bell makes when struck. From the doorway below, she listens closely as her father tests the ropes that control the swinging metal shapes above the city. Each bell has its own voice. One speaks clearly across the river. Another carries farther toward the fields beyond the walls. A third echoes softly through narrow streets where houses stand close together. She begins counting the hours by listening instead of watching the sun. Years later, she will still remember those sounds long after the scaffolding has disappeared and the tower stands complete. The cathedral teaches time in a new way. It also teaches patience. Everyone living in the town understands that the building will not be finished quickly. Children who watch the first stones rise may grow old before the final carvings appear above the entrance. Yet this does not discourage anyone. Instead, it creates a shared sense of continuity that stretches beyond individual lives. A mason places one stone knowing his grandson may place the next layer above it. A glass painter installs one window, knowing another workshop will finish the next. The building becomes a conversation between generations. Travelers passing through the town begin recognizing its cathedral from far away. Long before they reach the gates, they see the tower rising above the rooftops like a marker placed carefully against the horizon. Some travelers change their route slightly just to pass through the square and step inside the growing structure. Pilgrims arrive carrying stories from other regions where similar buildings are rising. They compare towers, windows, and carvings the way merchants compare goods in a market. Each cathedral becomes part of a larger network of sacred landmarks, stretching quietly across Europe. With pilgrims come trade. Innkeepers prepare extra rooms. Bakers increase their ovens. Cloth sellers display brighter fabrics near the square where visitors gather. Even those who do not work directly on the cathedral begin benefiting from its presence. The building feeds the town in more ways than one. Inside the cathedral, services continue even while construction remains unfinished. People gather beneath temporary wooden coverings where stone ceilings will eventually stand. Candles burn beside pillars that still carry marks from the tools that shaped them. No one waits for completion before entering. The cathedral belongs to the present as much as to the future. At dusk, when the final bell rings across the rooftops, its sound travels slowly over the fields beyond the town walls. Farmers returning home from their work pause for a moment to listen before continuing along the road. The echo fades gradually, leaving behind a quiet that feels different from the silence of earlier centuries. This silence is not uncertain. It is settled. Inside the square, The bell ringer's daughter stands beside the tower doorway again, listening as the last vibration disappears into the evening air. She does not think about how long the building will take to finish. She only knows that tomorrow morning the bell will sound again, and the city will begin moving once more beneath its steady rhythm. Centuries earlier, people had watched the sky grow dim without understanding why. Now they live inside towns where towers rise confidently into brighter air, marking time with sound instead of fear. Yet far beyond these growing cities, along the distant shores of the eastern Mediterranean, another stone city stands at the edge of the sea, listening not for bells, but for the slow approach of armies gathering beyond its walls. Far from the cathedral squares of Europe, where bells shape the rhythm of daily life, another city stands beside the sea with a different kind of sound filling its streets. Here, instead of bells, you hear ships. Their ropes pull tight against wooden docks. Their sails fold slowly in the morning wind. Their hulls rest shoulder to shoulder along the harbor walls as merchants step ashore, carrying news from islands, deserts, and distant ports beyond the horizon. This city is Acre. For generations, it has been one of the most important gateways between Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Pilgrims pass through its gates on their way to sacred destinations. Traders unload spices, cloth, glassware, and metals gathered from markets that stretch far beyond the shoreline. Soldiers walk the same streets as sailors and shopkeepers, each group moving with different purposes, but sharing the same narrow spaces. Acre is not only a fortress, it is a meeting place. You arrive at the harbor just as the first light of morning spreads across the water. The sea reflects the pale sky in long, shifting lines that move gently between anchored ships. Dock workers are already at their tasks. They walk carefully along the planks, carrying crates balanced against their shoulders, moving with the steady rhythm of people who have repeated the same work for many seasons. One dock worker pauses beside a stack of cargo marked with symbols from distant ports. He cannot read the marks, but he recognizes their shapes. Each one means a different journey. Each one carries a different story. He counts the crates once before moving them. Then he counts them again. Accuracy matters in a place like this. Behind him, the harbor grows louder as more ships arrive. Some carry pilgrims who step carefully onto the docks with cautious excitement, adjusting their cloaks as they look toward the city walls rising beyond the waterfront. Others bring merchants whose wagons already wait nearby, prepared to carry goods inland along dusty roads that connect Acre to the wider region. Languages overlap in the morning air. French blends with Italian, Arabic mixes with Greek. Traders gesture with their hands when words fail them, trusting that exchange can continue even when speech becomes uncertain. The harbor learns to understand all of them. Beyond the docks, the city itself stretches along narrow streets, lined with stone houses and tall towers built for defense as much as for shelter. Markets open early. Bakers prepare bread in ovens that have already been warm since before dawn. Water carriers move carefully between crowded corners where travelers gather to plan their next journeys. The smell of spices drifts through the air. Pepper arrives from distant lands beyond the eastern deserts. Cinnamon travels across long caravan routes before reaching the harbor warehouses. Cloth from Mediterranean workshops hangs beside goods brought by merchants who have crossed seas no one in the marketplace has ever seen. Everything passes through Acre. Everything pauses here, if only briefly. High above the harbor, the city walls stand thick and watchful. They have protected the port through many seasons of uncertainty. Towers rise at intervals along their length, allowing guards to watch both the sea and the inland approaches, where armies have appeared before and may appear again. The people living inside these walls understand that their city stands at the edge of something fragile. It is strong, but it is also exposed. For many years, Acre has served as the final major stronghold of Crusader presence in the region. Other cities once held by Western rulers have already fallen or changed hands through long struggles. Acre remains, holding its place beside the sea like a carefully balanced stone at the edge of a path. Pilgrims arriving from Europe often see the city as a doorway to sacred landscapes farther inland. Merchants see it as a center of exchange, where goods from 3 continents meet. Soldiers see it as a frontier that must be defended if the remaining territories are to survive. Each group understands Acre differently, yet all depend on it. Inside one of the harbor warehouses, the dock worker finishes stacking the last crate from the morning shipment. He steps outside again and looks across the water where more ships approach slowly from the horizon. Their sails catch the light in pale shapes that seem almost peaceful from a distance. He has watched ships arrive like this for many years. Some bring opportunity. Some bring uncertainty. He cannot yet know which kind these will be. Along the upper streets near the city walls, guards begin their daily patrol, moving carefully between towers as they study the inland roads beyond the gates. Travelers still enter the city without difficulty. Markets remain open. Bells from nearby churches still mark the passing hours. Life continues. But rumors have begun traveling along the same trade routes that carry spices and cloth. They speak of armies gathering farther inland, moving slowly but steadily toward the coast. No one inside the harbor can see those armies yet. Still, the stories arrive. And once stories like these begin appearing in a city that has already watched so many frontiers shift over time, people start listening more carefully to the horizon. The dock worker finishes his count and rests his hand against the rough wooden surface of a cargo crate beside him. The harbor wind moves gently across the water, carrying the distant sound of sails tightening as another ship approaches the docks. For now, the city continues its work as it always has. But beyond the inland hills, something larger has already begun its slow journey toward Acre's waiting walls. At first, the rumors arrive quietly. They travel along merchant routes that once carried spices and cloth into Acre's harbor. Traders speak of movement farther inland. Travelers describe columns of soldiers passing through valleys beyond the hills. Messengers arrive at the gates carrying reports written quickly and folded carefully, as though speed matters more than elegance. Inside the city, people listen. No one closes the markets. No one abandons the harbor. Yet conversations begin ending with longer pauses than before. From the towers along the inland walls, guards start watching the horizon more closely. They already know the roads that lead toward the city. They have studied those routes for years. Now they look along them not for caravans or pilgrims, but for something heavier. Soon they see it. Far beyond the outer fields, a faint line of movement appears where dust rises slowly above the road. It does not scatter like a passing herd of animals. It does not fade like a merchant caravan turning toward another town. It remains steady, growing thicker day by day. The army approaching Acre belongs to the Mamluk rulers of Egypt. For many years, these rulers have been reclaiming territories that once stood under Crusader control. One city after another has changed hands, through long campaigns that move carefully along the coast. Acre has remained the last major stronghold of Western rule in the region. Now that stronghold has become their destination. Inside the city, preparations begin at once. Workers carry stones toward the walls where repairs are needed. Carpenters reinforce gates that have stood through earlier conflicts. Archers check their supplies. Messengers move quickly between towers, carrying instructions from one section of the defenses to another. The harbor continues working as always, but fewer ships arrive now. Some merchants decide to remain at sea rather than enter a port that may soon face attack. Others unload their goods quickly and prepare to depart again before conditions change further. Along the inland approaches, the Mamluk army establishes its camps methodically. Tents appear first, arranged in careful rows that stretch farther than most defenders inside the city can easily count. Then come the supply wagons, the animals carrying timber and rope, and the large wooden frames that will soon become siege machines. These machines do not move quickly. They are assembled piece by piece. Workers raise tall beams into place and secure them with heavy cords. Stone projectiles are gathered nearby, shaped carefully so they will travel smoothly through the air when released. The entire process unfolds slowly enough that people watching from the walls can see each stage clearly. The approach of the siege is not sudden, it is deliberate. Inside Acre, leaders from different military groups gather to discuss how the city should respond. Knights from various orders share responsibility for defending the walls. Local officials coordinate supplies. Merchants consider whether their warehouses should remain open or be emptied in preparation for a longer struggle. Agreement does not come easily. The defenders share a common goal, but they do not always share the same plans. Some argue for strong resistance along the outer defenses. Others suggest concentrating forces near the harbor where evacuation might still be possible if the walls fail. These discussions take time. Time continues moving forward outside the gates as well. Along one section of the wall facing inland fields, a young squire carries buckets of water to soldiers standing watch above the towers. He climbs the narrow steps carefully, balancing the weight with both hands, while trying not to spill what the defenders will soon need. He has never seen a siege before. From the top of the wall, he can see the distant lines of tents spreading across the fields where farmers once worked quietly only weeks earlier. The transformation feels difficult to understand. The same ground that once held crops now holds an army. He passes the water to an older knight who nods without speaking. Words are less necessary here. Everyone already understands what is coming. As the days pass, the siege machines move closer to the city. Large throwing frames are positioned within range of the walls. Workers test their movements slowly, adjusting ropes and supports until the structures stand steady enough to begin their work. The first stones do not arrive immediately. Instead, the defenders watch the preparation continue day after day, each adjustment reminding them that the attack will not be brief. Inside the streets below the walls, daily life continues with careful attention. Bakers still prepare bread. Water carriers still move between houses. Children remain indoors more often than before, though they listen closely to every sound from the towers above. The harbor stays open. Ships remain ready. Yet fewer people speak about trade now. More people speak about endurance. At sunset, the young squire returns along the wall, carrying another bucket of water toward the soldiers watching the distant camps. The evening light settles across the fields between the army and the city, turning the tents into long shadows that stretch slowly across the ground. He pauses for a moment before handing the bucket to the guard beside him. From where he stands, the city still feels strong. The walls still stand. The gates remain closed. But beyond those gates, the machines that will soon test them are already waiting. For many days, the siege moves slowly. The machines beyond the walls are adjusted again and again. Guards watch from the towers. Messengers carry reports between commanders. The harbor remains open, though fewer ships now approach the docks. Then one morning, the waiting ends. The first stones rise into the air. From the walls, defenders watch them travel slowly across the space between the camps and the city. They do not move quickly. They arc through the sky with heavy certainty, descending toward towers that have stood for generations. The sound arrives moments later. Stone striking stone does not produce a sharp noise. It produces a deep echo that travels through walls, through streets, through the ground itself. People inside the city pause where they stand, listening as the first impact settles into silence. Soon another follows. Then another. Across the outer defenses, dust begins drifting down from damaged sections of wall. Workers rush forward, carrying tools and replacement stones. Archers take positions along the towers, watching the machines that continue sending projectiles toward them at steady intervals. The siege has begun in earnest. Inside Acre, daily routines change quickly. Market stalls close earlier than usual. Families gather belongings that can be carried easily. Doors are reinforced. Wells are checked. Messages move faster through the streets than before. Yet life does not stop. Bread is still baked. Water is still drawn. Candles are still lit at dusk. These small actions continue even as the walls begin to weaken. After several days of repeated strikes, sections of the outer defenses begin showing visible damage. Cracks widen. Stones loosen. Repair crews work through the night by torchlight, lifting replacement blocks into place wherever they can. But the pressure continues. At last, one portion of the wall gives way. The collapse is not sudden everywhere at once. It begins with a section that falls inward under repeated impact, opening a gap large enough for attackers to move closer to the city's interior defenses. Dust rises into the air, drifting slowly through nearby streets as people step back from the sound. The defenders do not retreat immediately. Instead, they reorganize. Barricades appear across narrow passages. Archers take positions at corners where they can watch approaching movement. Knights gather near secondary walls prepared for the next stage of defense. The struggle moves inward. Along one of the city's market streets, a merchant's widow stands inside her small house, listening to the distant noise of falling stone. Her husband once traded cloth along the harbor road, but he is no longer there to help her decide what to do next. She kneels beside a wooden chest and lifts several folded pieces of fabric that remain from earlier shipments. One by one, she places them beneath loose boards in the floor, covering them carefully before standing again. She does not know whether she will return for them later, but she hopes the house will remain standing long enough to make that possible. Outside, defenders move quickly between towers that still hold their positions. Orders are passed quietly from one group to another. Messengers run along familiar streets that now feel narrower than before. The fighting spreads gradually rather than all at once. Some districts remain calm for hours after the first breach. Others hear the sound of movement almost immediately. The city does not fall in a single moment. It changes piece by piece as pressure moves from one wall to the next. Near the harbor, the stronghold of the Knights Templar becomes the focus of final preparations. Its towers rise close to the shoreline where ships can still approach if conditions allow. Supplies are gathered there. Defenders move toward its gates, understanding that this position may become the last place from which resistance can continue. The harbor itself remains filled with uncertainty. Some vessels attempt to take passengers aboard. Others wait farther from shore, unsure whether approaching the docks is still safe. Sailors watch the city walls from a distance, trying to judge how long they will remain standing. Smoke begins drifting above the rooftops as fighting spreads closer to residential districts. Not all of it comes from fire. Much of it rises from dust shaken loose by collapsing stone and broken structures. From a distance, it looks like a thin gray veil settling across the harbor air. Inside the streets, people move more carefully now. Conversations grow shorter. Footsteps become quieter. Even those not directly involved in defending the walls understand that the shape of the city is changing around them. The merchant's widow steps outside her doorway for a moment as evening begins settling across the rooftops. She looks toward the harbor, where the towers of the Templar stronghold still stand clearly against the fading light. For now, they remain intact. For now, the streets around her still hold familiar paths leading toward the market and the square where she once traded cloth beside her husband. She closes her door again before night fully arrives. Beyond the walls that have already fallen, the armies continue moving closer toward the center of the city. And near the harbor, the final defenses prepare for the moment when they alone will remain between Acre and silence. By the time the final defenses gather near the harbor, the shape of the city has already changed. The outer walls no longer hold. The inner streets carry unfamiliar echoes. Smoke moves slowly between towers that once marked the safe boundaries of daily life. Yet the harbor still remains open. And as long as the harbor remains open, the city still holds one path leading outward across the sea. Ships begin arriving not to trade, but to wait. They anchor just beyond the shoreline, watching carefully for signals from the docks. Sailors stand beside their rigging, ready to raise sails at a moment's notice. Some vessels approach close enough to take passengers aboard. Others remain farther out, uncertain how long the harbor can still be reached safely. Inside Acre, people begin moving toward the waterfront in quiet groups. They carry what they can. They leave behind what they cannot. No one speaks loudly as they walk through the narrowing streets. The sound of distant movement along the walls reminds everyone that time is no longer measured by bells or markets. It is measured by distance from the harbor. Near the shoreline, the stronghold of the Knights Templar continues standing above the docks like a final stone anchor at the edge of the city. Its towers face both land and sea, holding their position as defenders gather inside for what may be their last hours of resistance. From the decks of waiting ships, sailors watch the harbor gates carefully. Signals appear. Passengers begin boarding. The process unfolds slowly at first. Families step across narrow planks connecting the docks to the ships. Bundles are passed from hand to hand. Children are lifted carefully across the gaps between wood and water. The sea moves gently beneath them, steady but uncertain. as though aware that it is carrying more than ordinary travelers. Along the quay, the dock worker who once counted cargo crates now watches a different kind of departure. He stands beside the same wooden posts where ships once unloaded spices and cloth. The markings left by years of trade are still visible on the planks beneath his feet. Yet the harbor no longer sounds like a market. It sounds like farewell. He helps guide passengers toward a waiting vessel, steadying the plank as they cross. He does not ask where they will go. Many do not know themselves. They only know they must leave while the path remains open. Behind him, the towers of Acre still rise against the fading sky. For a moment, they look unchanged. But everyone along the harbor understands that the city they have known is already slipping into memory. As the evacuation continues, defenders near the Templar stronghold hold their positions as long as possible. Their task is not to save the walls. Their task is to give the ships time. One vessel pulls away, then another, then several more. Each departure leaves the harbor quieter than before. Eventually, the shoreline grows crowded only with those who remain behind. Some choose to stay because they cannot leave. Others remain because they believe their place is beside the final defenses. Still others simply wait too long, hoping the situation will change before the last ships depart. It does not. As evening settles across the water, the final vessels begin lifting their sails. From the decks, passengers watch the city grow smaller against the darkening horizon. The towers that once guided travelers safely toward the harbor now mark the edge of something ending rather than something beginning. The dock worker remains standing on the quay until the last ship moves beyond the reach of his voice. The wind carries only the sound of waves against the stone walls. Later, the defenders near the harbor stronghold withdraw to their final positions. Resistance continues for a time, but without support from the sea, the outcome becomes clear. Acre, which had stood for generations as the last major crusader port in the region, passes into new hands. The shoreline does not disappear. Ships continue sailing. Trade continues moving across the Mediterranean. But the flags that once flew above the harbor towers are no longer the same. Control of the coast shifts quietly from one world to another. In Europe, news of the city's fall travels slowly along familiar routes that once carried pilgrims toward the east. People hear that the last great harbor of the Crusader kingdoms has been lost. At first, the reports sound distant, almost unreal. Yet over time they settle into memory, becoming part of the long story of changing frontiers that shaped the medieval world. The Crusader shoreline fades, not in a single moment, but in recollection. Maps are redrawn. Journeys are reconsidered. Stories grow shorter each time they are retold. Back at the harbor, the dock worker turns away from the empty quay as dusk deepens into evening. The water reflects the fading light like a dark mirror stretching toward the horizon where the ships have already disappeared. He walks slowly along the familiar path beside the warehouses, now quiet in a way he has never known before. For centuries, cities along distant shores will rise and fall in similar ways. Yet long before Acre's final ships left its harbor, another society had already begun learning how power might survive not through walls or ports, but through households, memory, and careful succession passed from one generation to the next. Long before the harbor of Acre fell silent, long before cathedral towers rose across medieval towns, another world had already begun learning how power could survive uncertainty in a different way. That lesson began in Rome. In the final years of the Roman Republic, the city no longer moved with the steady confidence it had once known. Laws still existed, assemblies still gathered. Senators still spoke beneath painted ceilings and marble halls. Yet beneath these familiar routines, something quieter and more fragile had begun to change. Authority was no longer simple. Families who had guided the Republic for generations now watched the political ground shift beneath their feet. Alliances formed quickly and dissolved just as quickly. Armies followed individual commanders instead of the state alone. News traveled through the streets faster than certainty could follow it. Into this unsettled world, a child named Livia Drusilla was born. Her family belonged to Rome's old aristocratic tradition, a world shaped by reputation, loyalty, and careful attention to ancestry. From an early age, she would have learned how important it was to understand not only what people said, but what they intended. Roman households in these years did not treat politics as something distant from daily life. Politics entered through the doorway. It appeared in letters delivered at dawn. It traveled with visiting relatives who arrived unexpectedly. It shaped conversations that paused when servants entered the room and resumed only after doors were closed again. Inside one such household courtyard, a servant kneels beside a wooden travel chest, folding garments carefully into its narrow space. The decision to prepare the trunk has not been announced loudly, but everyone understands why it must be done. Families move when alliances shift. They move when armies approach. They move when it becomes wiser to be somewhere else. The attendant ties the final cord around the chest and sets it beside the doorway, ready for departure if departure becomes necessary. In homes like this across Rome, similar preparations are taking place. No one speaks of fear. They speak of readiness. During Livia's childhood, the Republic passes through a series of conflicts that reshape its political structure. Leaders who once cooperated begin competing openly. Armies cross territories that had long remained peaceful. Citizens learn to recognize the distant sound of marching columns as part of ordinary life. For aristocratic families, survival requires careful attention to loyalty. Support the wrong figure too openly, and a household may lose influence. Support the right figure too late, and opportunity may disappear. So families learn to move cautiously. They maintain friendships across several political groups at once. They arrange marriages that strengthen connections rather than weaken them. They send letters that express agreement without closing other possibilities. Livia grows up watching these decisions unfold around her. She learns that stability in Rome is not something given. It is something maintained. In these years, Julius Caesar's rise to power begins changing the structure of the Republic in ways that cannot easily be reversed. His victories bring confidence to some and concern to others. After his assassination, the city does not return to its earlier balance. Instead, uncertainty deepens. Competing leaders gather support. Alliances form again. And once more, households prepare for movement. The attendant who packed the travel chest earlier now carries it across the courtyard toward a waiting cart outside the gate. He does not know how long the household will remain away from Rome. He only knows that movement has become part of life in a city where the future cannot be predicted from one season to the next. Young Livia watches these preparations carefully. She sees how her elders speak differently to different visitors. She notices how letters are sealed quickly and delivered without delay. She observes which names are spoken with confidence and which are spoken more quietly. These observations become part of her education. Later, writers would sometimes describe her as unusually composed, unusually patient, unusually attentive to the details of political life. Such qualities do not appear suddenly. They grow slowly in households where survival depends on watching carefully and speaking at the right moment. As the struggles following Caesar's death continue, Rome gradually moves toward a new form of leadership that will no longer resemble the old republic. One figure in particular begins gathering authority in ways that suggest lasting change. His name is Octavian. At first, he appears only as one participant among several powerful leaders. Yet over time, his influence grows. Victories strengthen his position. Alliances shift in his favor. Families across Rome begin adjusting their expectations once again. Inside Livia's household, conversations grow more focused. Letters arrive more frequently. Visitors remain longer. The attendant who once packed travel trunks now waits beside the doorway again, listening as footsteps approach from the street outside. Another message has arrived. Another decision will soon follow. For families like Livia's, these years are not only about survival. They are about preparation. Because before long, she will meet the man whose rise will reshape Rome itself, and whose partnership with her will help transform uncertainty into something far more lasting than the republic that came before it. By the time Livia meets Octavian, Rome has already grown used to change. The republic that once depended on competing voices inside the Senate now finds itself moving towards something quieter and more concentrated. Authority begins gathering around a single household rather than spreading across many families. The shift does not happen in a single moment. It unfolds gradually, like a river changing its course over several seasons rather than a single storm. Within this changing world, Livia's marriage to Octavian becomes more than a private arrangement. It becomes part of the structure of a new political order. Their union takes place during years when alliances still carry uncertainty, and decisions about loyalty remain delicate. Yet over time, their partnership begins to represent something steadier than the shifting arrangements that had defined earlier decades. In Rome, people watch carefully. They do not always hear speeches explaining the future of the state. Instead, they observe households. They watch marriages. They notice which families stand beside rising leaders and which step quietly away. Livia's presence beside Octavian soon becomes one of the most recognizable signs that his authority is settling into permanence. Inside their residence, daily life continues with a rhythm that feels deliberately calm. Visitors arrive at appointed hours. Messengers carry letters between rooms where discussions unfold quietly. Servants move across polished stone floors with practiced familiarity, maintaining routines that suggest continuity, even while the political world outside continues adjusting itself. In one of these rooms, a palace scribe sits at a narrow table covered with smooth sheets prepared for writing. He dips his stylus into ink and begins copying a message that will soon travel to one of Rome's provincial governors. The letter concerns administrative matters, but its heading includes the name of the household from which it comes. That name carries weight. When officials in distant provinces read such letters, they do not see only instructions. They see confirmation that authority now speaks from a stable center rather than from competing factions. The scribe works slowly, shaping each letter with care. Accuracy matters more than speed. Coins produced during these same years begin carrying images that reinforce this impression of stability. Portraits of Octavian appear beside symbols that suggest continuity with Rome's older traditions. Over time, representations connected with his household help communicate a new idea, that the strength of the state now rests not only in laws or armies, but also in the example set by its leading family. Livia's role in this image is quiet but unmistakable. She appears as a figure associated with dignity, restraint, and order. Later writers will describe her as embodying the virtues expected of a Roman matron, a model of household discipline and loyalty. Whether these descriptions reflect daily reality in every detail is difficult to know. What matters is that the image itself becomes widely recognized. Images shape expectations. Expectations shape memory. In the courtyard outside the writing room, servants arrange offerings for a small household shrine that honors ancestral figures connected with the family's past. These rituals are familiar to many Roman homes, yet within the imperial residence they carry broader meaning. They remind visitors that authority is not only political, it is also personal, connected to lineage and tradition. Livia understands this language well. Her upbringing in an aristocratic household had already taught her how reputation travels through gestures as much as through words. Now, beside Octavian, those gestures become part of a larger performance that helps define what leadership will look like in the years ahead. As Octavian's position strengthens following his victories over remaining rivals, the city begins adjusting to a new pattern of governance. He does not present himself as a king. Instead, he adopts titles that suggest responsibility rather than domination. The appearance of continuity with the old republic remains important. Within this careful balance, the imperial household becomes a visible symbol of moderation. Visitors notice the order of its routines. Citizens observe the steadiness of its ceremonies. Provincial officials read letters that arrive with consistent authority. Through these repeated impressions, confidence begins replacing uncertainty. The palace scribe finishes copying the final line of his message and lifts the page carefully so the ink can dry. Once the seal is applied, the letter will travel along roads that connect Rome to regions far beyond the city walls. By the time it reaches its destination, the identity of the household that sent it will already be understood. It will not need explanation. Nearby, Livia walks slowly through the courtyard, where sunlight falls across the paving stones in quiet patterns. She does not speak loudly. She does not need to issue commands. Her presence itself communicates something about continuity at a moment when Rome is learning how to live under a new kind of leadership. Those who observe her may not yet realize how long her influence will continue shaping the future of the imperial family. But they understand one thing clearly. This household is no longer temporary. It has become part of Rome's structure, and in the years ahead, the stability it represents will help guide decisions that reach far beyond a single reign. As the new imperial household settles into its role at the center of Roman political life, another question begins to grow quietly within its walls. Who will come next? For generations under the Republic, leadership had changed through elections, negotiations, and occasional conflict. Now Rome is learning how to imagine continuity in a different way. Authority no longer moves easily from one household to another. It must travel carefully within a single family. This kind of transition requires planning. It also requires patience. Within the imperial residence, conversations about succession unfold slowly and often indirectly. They appear in letters sent to distant relatives. They appear in marriage arrangements that strengthen certain connections while loosening others. They appear in ceremonies where young members of the household begin taking part in public life earlier than before. Among those watching these developments closely is Livia's son, Tiberius. He does not grow into his future role all at once. Instead, he learns gradually, observing the rhythms of a household that now carries responsibilities once shared across the republic itself. As a young man, he stands quietly beside elders during public ceremonies, listening to speeches that describe Rome's stability as something carefully restored rather than newly created. He accompanies experienced officials on journeys that introduce him to provinces far from the capital. Each of these experiences becomes part of an education shaped less by formal instruction than by example. In the evenings, when the day's business has ended and lamps are lit along the corridors of the residence, Tiberius sometimes pauses beside the small shrines that honor the household's ancestors. These rituals are familiar to many Roman families, but here they carry wider meaning. They remind him that he is not only a son, he is part of a lineage expected to continue. At the same time, the path toward succession remains uncertain for many years. Augustus considers several possible heirs before the future becomes clear. Younger members of the extended household receive attention and responsibility. Some are prepared carefully for leadership roles that circumstances later remove from them. These changes do not occur publicly all at once. They unfold quietly, often through private decisions recorded only in letters and official notices. Across the empire, provincial governors begin receiving correspondence that reflects these shifting expectations. Messages travel along roads that stretch across mountains and deserts, carrying news about appointments, honors, and responsibilities granted to members of the imperial family. Each letter contributes to a larger understanding. Succession is being shaped step by step. Within this process, Livia's position remains steady. Later historians would sometimes describe her as unusually influential in guiding these decisions. One writer in particular, the historian Tacitus, suggested that she may have played a stronger role behind the scenes than official accounts openly acknowledged. His descriptions reflect the concerns of his own time as much as the realities of hers, and modern scholars often read them carefully rather than accepting them without question. What can be seen more clearly is that Livia remained present at the center of the household throughout these years of preparation. Her experience in navigating earlier political uncertainty had already taught her how important continuity could be. Now continuity becomes the household's central task. Marriage alliances strengthen connections between branches of the imperial family. Public ceremonies introduce younger relatives to the population as recognizable figures within the future leadership of the state. Letters confirm responsibilities that prepare them gradually for wider authority. These steps create familiarity. Familiarity creates acceptance. Acceptance makes succession possible. Along one corridor of the residence, a group of officials gathers beside a table where several documents have just arrived from distant provinces. Seals are examined carefully before being opened. Each message contains news about conditions in regions that depend on the stability of leadership in Rome. Among those standing nearby is Tiberius. He does not speak often during these moments. Instead, he listens as older advisors discuss the meaning of each report. He watches how decisions are made, how messages are answered, how authority travels outward from the center of the empire through written instructions rather than through sudden announcements. Learning happens quietly here. Elsewhere in the residence, Preparations continue for ceremonies that present members of the imperial household before the public. These occasions are not only celebrations, they are introductions. They allow citizens to see who may one day guide the empire after Augustus. Over time, expectations begin settling around Tiberius more clearly. His responsibilities increase. His appearances beside Augustus become more frequent. His role in military and administrative matters grows more visible. None of this happens suddenly. It happens gradually enough that the transition begins to feel natural. In the evening, after the corridors grow quiet again, Tiberius pauses once more beside the household shrine. The small lamps placed there cast steady light across the figures representing earlier generations. Their presence reminds him that succession is not only about authority, it is about memory. And long after these preparations are complete, long after Augustus himself is gone, that memory will continue shaping how the empire understands the place of Livia within its story. As the years pass and Augustus's reign comes to its natural end, the structure he helped create does not disappear with him. Instead, it continues. This continuity is not accidental. It is the result of many careful decisions made across decades inside a household that understood how fragile authority could become if it depended on only one life. Succession, once uncertain, now moves forward along a path prepared gradually and patiently. Tiberius becomes emperor. For many citizens of Rome, this transition does not feel like the sudden beginning of a new age. It feels like the continuation of an arrangement already familiar. The same household remains at the center of political life. The same rituals mark the passing of time. The same expectations guide how authority is recognized across the empire. Within this continuity, Livia's presence does not fade as quickly as might be expected. Even after her lifetime ends, her influence continues through memory, ceremony, and example. Later generations remember her not only as the wife of Augustus, but as a figure who helped shape the idea that leadership could pass steadily from one generation to another. In Roman tradition, memory is not private, it is public. Images of ancestors appear in homes, in temples, and in processions that move through the streets during important ceremonies. Names are repeated aloud so they remain part of the living world. Stories are told again and again so that the past continues guiding the present. Livia's memory enters this tradition. During the reign of Emperor Claudius, she receives formal recognition as a divine figure connected with the imperial household. This honor does not suggest that she ruled directly in the way emperors did. Instead, it reflects the belief that her role in establishing continuity deserved lasting acknowledgement. Rituals begin including her name alongside those of earlier members of the imperial family. Temples display her image. Public ceremonies remind citizens that stability often grows from generations working together rather than from a single moment of change. On a clear morning in Rome, a small crowd gathers near one of these ceremonial spaces where offerings are prepared before carved figures representing imperial ancestors. Incense rises slowly into the air, carrying a scent that lingers long after the ritual itself has ended. Among those watching stands a citizen who has lived through several transitions of leadership already. He remembers hearing stories from his parents about the uncertain final years of the Republic. He remembers seeing Augustus's image on newly issued coins when he was young. Now he watches another ceremony, confirming that the same household continues guiding the empire. The experience feels familiar rather than surprising. Nearby, priests move carefully between altars, arranging offerings in a sequence that has been repeated many times before. Each gesture follows established patterns. Each name spoken aloud strengthens the connection between past rulers and present authority. Through repetition, memory becomes structure. Through structure, authority becomes stable. The idea of imperial motherhood begins carrying special meaning during these years as well. Livia's role as the mother of the emperor helps define how later generations understand the importance of family continuity in Roman political life. Her example becomes part of a larger pattern in which the women of the imperial household represent stability, dignity, and connection between generations. This symbolism does not rely on speeches alone. It appears in statues placed in public spaces. It appears in coins that travel across the empire from marketplace to marketplace. It appears in ceremonies where citizens gather to witness rituals that link present leadership with remembered ancestors. Each appearance strengthens the impression that Rome's future now rests within a line of succession shaped carefully over time. Across distant provinces, governors continue receiving messages bearing the names of rulers whose authority follows this established pattern. Roads carry these messages across mountains and rivers. Cities far from Rome adjust their own ceremonies to match those performed in the capital. The empire learns to recognize continuity as a form of reassurance. Years earlier, during the dim summers of the 6th century, people had searched the sky for signs of stability. Later, builders raised cathedrals toward the light as expressions of shared faith. Along the eastern Mediterranean coast, Acre's harbor had once marked the edge of a fragile frontier that could not hold forever. Now, in Rome, continuity takes a different form. It takes the form of memory. The citizen standing beside the ceremonial altar watches as the final offerings are placed before the carved images of imperial ancestors. The incense smoke rises slowly into the morning air, softening the outlines of the figures until they seem almost part of the light itself. He does not think of politics in that moment. He thinks of time. He understands that the empire he lives within has survived not only through victories and walls, but through careful attention to how one generation prepares the way for the next. And in that preparation, the memory of Livia continues to stand quietly beside the foundations of Rome's enduring dynasty. And so, we've reached the end of tonight's wandering. Whether your eyes are still open or already drifting, thank you for keeping me company here among worn stones, warm embers, and the small brave rituals of ordinary people. If this brought you a little quiet, you're welcome to subscribe or share it with someone who might need a softer night. For now, rest well, you're safe, you're warm, and the past can keep watch.